At-risk youth are great at identifying predators. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist. Many years ago, I used to work with at-risk youth and children who were involved in the foster care or the penal system. And I worked specifically for a group home that provided emergency housing to children who had been to detention centers, who had been surrendered or taken away from their parents. Any number of crisis situations where these youth would come and stay in this facility for, unspecified amounts of time. And in working with these youth, I noticed two things. Especially for children who've been involved in the system for quite some time, they're very savvy, and a lot of times they can identify predatory behaviors because typically these children have been in juvenile detention, they've been in foster care, they've been in just about every situation. Maybe a lot of them had been homeless and whatnot. And so they had, became adults way too soon. And so I'll give you two scenarios that, I got to see that can kind of explain that, just because you can identify the predator doesn't mean that you necessarily make the best decisions for your safety when it comes to them. So one example would be of children when they're when there's an attempt to reunify them with their families, especially from children who have been, their parents had lost their parental rights, the state will make every attempt to keep these children reunified with their parents as long as they want it. These were children that had been exposed to extremely abusive or extremely neglectful situations. And just a side note here, it is very, very difficult for parents to lose their parental rights. So just know that if a parent has ever lost their parental rights of their children, at least for the state of California, in which I'm familiar with, just know that something very serious has happened in order for them to do that. But anyhow, even despite that, like with the children that I worked with, if they still had contact with their family, regardless of how abusive the parent was or whatever, in most cases, parents could come and visit their children on the weekends, or that the children could go and stay with them depending on their situation, right? What would happen, it was interesting because, even in the facility, I worked with a lot of LGBTQIA plus youth, and it's very interesting because a lot of these parents weren't accepting of their children. They want their children to sort of fall in line. And these children would literally code switch and wipe away their identity for the simple fact that they still want to remain connected to their families regardless of how abusive the situation was. So they would kind of do everything that they could do just to get like that acceptance for the weekend and, kind of beg to go back home, and only to be heartbroken again when they would be dropped back off at the facility, or if parents never came to visit them or whatnot. You would just kind of watch their heart break every time. But it's interesting the lengths that we go to try to get acceptance from an abuser, and even though logically we comprehend that it's an abusive situation, emotionally we still very much want to try to be accepted. The second scenario, and where a lot of adopted youth or fostered youth or children that are in the system can oftentimes detect predatory behaviors, is when, at least in my experience, when these children were in the group home, potential foster parents could come and look, and they could go and spend time, once again on the weekends with a a foster family, a family, a potential family that was wanting to foster them. And a lot of times they would come as a couple, and it was sort of like a meet and greet. And, again, with the children that I worked with, they were girls, and they would just be so ready to get out of the system that they would sort of say, you know what, I'm just going to take this opportunity to go with this foster couple or whatever. And it's interesting because a lot of them would make a U-turn and come right back to our facility. And so, it would be through discovery that, like, hey, that, like, a lot of times these foster parents exhibit very creepy and predatory behavior, such as touching and fondling and things like that, which you can guess the rest of what that sort of leads up to. And even though they're able to pick up on these behaviors, there's a level of desperation of wanting to get out of the system, wanting to have some semblance of a normal life, wanting connection, wanting stability, that they forego those things, or they try to minimize these things and talk themselves through harm in an effort to create some sense of normalcy, and only just to experience the fact that the red flags that they try to minimize or ignore in the beginning end up being the very thing that comes back in the end, and so they end up circling back. I hope that makes sense. And the reason why I want to kind of explain things this way is because, I work with, again, abuse victims that sort of get down on themselves and start to think, well, I should have known better. I should have seen this and that. And chances are you probably did see red flags and things like that. So it's not a matter of logic. It becomes more of a matter of emotion and just hoping that your story will have a different ending, because you're so hopeful that something good will come to you, or that, this narrative doesn't always turn out the same way.